The Pacific Ocean stretches endlessly below, a vast expanse of blue reflecting the golden light of dawn. Above, a high-tech U.S. reconnaissance aircraft glides smoothly at cruising altitude, its powerful engines humming like a steady heartbeat. Inside the cockpit, the flight crew is calm, their movements precise and practiced. Each officer knows their role, monitoring instruments, scanning the horizon, and ensuring the mission stays on track. This aircraft isn't just another plane, it's a flying intelligence hub, packed with cutting-edge radar, thermal imaging, and advanced surveillance systems. Every second, it collects data from the ocean below and the skies around, feeding information back to military analysts stationed thousands of miles away. The crew members are experienced professionals, trained to observe without engaging, gather intelligence without confrontation. Everything seems routine. The mission checklist is being followed, flight paths are clear, and there are no signs of trouble until a sudden shift on the radar screen shatters the calm. A blip appears, then another. Fast-moving, unidentified. The radar operator leans in, eyes narrowing as he studies the data. The object's speed is alarming. Mach 2, nearly twice the speed of sound. Whatever is approaching isn't a commercial airliner or a routine military patrol. The silence is broken by a sharp, controlled voice. Unknown contact, fast-moving, closing in from our 3 o'clock. In an instant, the aircraft's internal systems respond. Alarms blare, warning lights flash red, signaling a potential threat. The pilots immediately switch to high alert. This isn't a drill. This is real. A streak of motion cuts through the sky. Out of nowhere, a Chinese J-16 fighter jet rockets into view. It moves with aggressive precision, its sharp nose pointed directly at the U.S. aircraft. The contrast is striking. One jet built for combat, the other designed for intelligence. One armed to the teeth, the other relying on its electronic eyes and ears. The American crew members don't need to be told what's happening. They've trained for this. Their mission may be surveillance, but in this moment, they are in the middle of a dangerous aerial confrontation. The tension inside the aircraft is palpable. Hands tighten around controls, breaths slow, and every movement is deliberate. This is no longer about gathering intelligence. It's about survival in hostile airspace. The J-16 doesn't just appear, it moves with purpose, cutting through the sky like a sword. The Chinese pilot is skilled, his aircraft closing in at an alarming rate. This isn't a random flyby. This is a message, a challenge. The question now isn't whether the U.S. pilots can complete their mission. The question is whether they can do it without triggering an international crisis. The sky is no longer just open air. It has become a battlefield of tension, skill, and precision. The Chinese J-16 fighter jet isn't simply flying past. It is hunting, calculating, and positioning itself strategically. The U.S. reconnaissance aircraft is built for surveillance, not combat. But that doesn't mean the crew is defenseless. Every move they make must be deliberate, precise, and controlled, because one miscalculation could send both aircraft spiraling out of control. The J-16 isn't flying in a standard intercept pattern. It's closing in fast, its sleek gray body slicing through the atmosphere with deadly intent. The American pilot keeps his hands steady on the controls, resisting the urge to react too soon. This is a test of nerve as much as skill. Then the Chinese jet makes its first aggressive move. It surges forward, slicing across the nose of the U.S. aircraft at a dangerously close distance. The sudden turbulence rocks the reconnaissance plane violently, shaking the entire fuselage as warning alarms blare inside the cockpit. This isn't just a warning, it's a power play. The Chinese pilot is making it clear, "You are in our airspace, leave now." Inside the reconnaissance jet, the American crew stays focused, despite the tension gripping the air. The pilot adjusts his altitude slightly, keeping the aircraft steady while his co-pilot maintains a sharp eye on the J-16's position. The U.S. military has strict protocols in these situations. No sudden movements, no unnecessary escalation, but absolutely no backing down. Suddenly, the J-16 executes a high-speed barrel roll directly over the U.S. aircraft. The maneuver is recklessly close, bringing the two aircraft within just a few feet of each other. The turbulence from the supersonic fighter jet's engines slams into the reconnaissance plane, like a shockwave, making every crew member grip their seats. One mistake here, one miscalculation of speed, altitude, or angle, could cause a mid-air collision. The American pilot maintains his composure, his training kicking in. He doesn't flinch. Instead, he adjusts his flight path slightly, ensuring the U.S. jet remains stable and on course. The Chinese pilot isn't finished. The J-16 drops lower, now flying parallel, almost wingtip to wingtip with the reconnaissance aircraft. From the cockpit window, the American crew can see the Chinese pilot's helmeted face staring straight at them. This is psychological warfare, a show of dominance. Inside the U.S. jet, radar specialists and intelligence officers work rapidly, gathering every bit of data they can on the Chinese aircraft. Every movement, every radio signal, and every maneuver is recorded and transmitted back to command centers thousands of miles away. Even under pressure, the mission must go on. A new alert suddenly flashes on the radar screens. Another aircraft, a second J-16, is inbound, joining its wingman in what is now a 2-on-1 formation. The airspace is getting crowded, dangerous, and unpredictable. The American pilot understands what's happening. The Chinese military isn't just intercepting them, they're boxing them in. If the reconnaissance aircraft makes a wrong move, the Chinese pilots could easily claim it was an intrusion into their airspace. If there's a collision, Beijing could use it as a political tool, blaming the U.S. for reckless behavior. This isn't just an aerial encounter, it's a carefully planned game of high-speed diplomacy, played with fighter jets at 30,000 feet. The two Chinese jets close in, forcing the U.S. aircraft into a narrower flight path. The American pilot knows he must tread carefully. If he reacts too strongly, he might be seen as escalating the situation. If he doesn't react at all, he risks giving the Chinese jets the upper hand. Then the lead Chinese fighter makes a bold and dangerous move. It cuts its throttle, dropping back directly in front of the reconnaissance jet. The American pilot immediately recognizes the tactic, a high-risk intimidation maneuver meant to force him into evasive action. If he pulls up or swerves to avoid the sudden obstacle, the Chinese jet will have successfully forced the U.S. aircraft off course. The crew braces as the reconnaissance jet closes in fast behind the J-16. A collision seems inevitable, but at the last second, the American pilot reacts with masterful precision. With a calculated movement, he gently adjusts altitude by just a few feet, slipping into a safer position without losing control. The move is subtle, professional, and disciplined, a silent response to the reckless provocation. The Chinese jets pull away slightly, perhaps realizing that their intimidation tactics have failed to shake the American resolve. But the encounter is far from over. The U.S. pilot keeps his grip firm on the controls, eyes locked on the horizon. His mission isn't to engage in combat, but to hold his ground, maintain his course, and complete his operation despite the mounting pressure. At these speeds, at this altitude, and under these conditions, every second feels like an eternity. One wrong move, one unpredictable action, and the Pacific skies could ignite into an international crisis. The battle isn't fought with missiles today, but with nerve, precision, and control. The Chinese jets haven't fired a single shot, but their presence is a message in itself. For the American crew, the mission isn't over yet. The sky may look like a peaceful, endless expanse, but above the Pacific, an invisible war is being fought every single day. It's a war without missiles, without explosions, but just as dangerous, just as strategic, and just as high stakes. Modern aerial combat isn't always about direct engagements. It's about intelligence, surveillance, deception, and control. In this battle, the most powerful weapon isn't always the fastest fighter jet or the deadliest missile. It's information. For decades, world superpowers have used the skies as a battlefield for intelligence gathering. Every mission, every flight, and every maneuver is part of a much larger picture. The aircraft flying today are not just machines. They are tools of strategy, politics, and global dominance. The reconnaissance aircraft in this encounter, likely a P-8 Poseidon or an RC-135 rivet joint, is designed for one purpose: to see what others don't want it to see. It is loaded with advanced surveillance equipment, signal interceptors, and electronic warfare tools that allow it to listen in on enemy communications, track military movements, and gather intelligence in real time. While the exterior of the plane might look similar to a standard commercial airliner, its insides are nothing like a passenger jet. Instead of rows of seats, it's lined with workstations, radar screens, advanced sensors, and encrypted communication channels. A flying intelligence hub feeding data directly to command centers across the world. Every flight, every sweep over the Pacific contributes to a larger intelligence network that helps shape military strategy. Where are naval warships moving? What exercises are being conducted? What new technology is being tested? The answers to these questions determine the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. This is precisely why China isn't just watching, it's actively trying to disrupt these missions. The two J-16 fighter jets, now flying dangerously close to the U.S. reconnaissance plane, aren't just there to scare the pilots. Their goal is to jam sensors, disrupt communications, and interfere with intelligence gathering. In modern warfare, electronic attacks can be just as effective as physical ones. The American crew quickly notices strange distortions on their screens, static, scrambled signals, and brief disruptions in radar clarity. The Chinese pilots are using electronic warfare tactics to make surveillance more difficult. But the U.S. crew isn't defenseless. They immediately counteract the interference using encrypted frequencies and advanced digital warfare systems. This is a battle not of missiles, but of signals and cyber tactics. The Chinese pilots are also playing another game, psychological warfare. By flying dangerously close, cutting across flight paths, and executing reckless maneuvers, they force the U.S. crew to make split-second decisions. Every reaction, every move, is being closely observed and analyzed. The Chinese military wants to understand U.S. tactics, see how their pilots react under pressure, and test the limits of their surveillance aircraft. This isn't the first time these encounters have happened. There's a long history of fighter jet intercepts turning deadly. In 2001, a Chinese J-8 fighter collided with a U.S. EP-3 reconnaissance plane over the South China Sea. The Chinese jet crashed into the ocean, and the damaged U.S. aircraft was forced to make an emergency landing on Hainan Island, where the crew was detained for 11 days. That single incident triggered an international crisis. In 2014, a Chinese J-11 flew just 20 feet from a U.S. P-8 Poseidon, executing a barrel roll directly over the aircraft, nearly causing a collision. In 2023, a Chinese J-16 cut across the path of a US B-52 bomber, flying just 10 feet away, so close that turbulence from its engines violently shook the massive bomber. One wrong move in any of these situations could have set off a chain reaction of conflict. Today's confrontation is no different. The two nations aren't at war, but they are constantly testing each other, seeing who will flinch first. The American pilot remains calm. This isn't a dogfight, but it is a battle of discipline. The reconnaissance plane maintains its flight path, refusing to be bullied into an early return. The Chinese jets, still flying aggressively close, receive new instructions from their command center. The mission isn't just about intimidation, it's about collecting data. Every movement of the U.S. aircraft is being logged. The J-16 pilots are testing its speed, climb rate, and electronic response times. The moment the American aircraft uses countermeasures against the electronic interference, Chinese military analysts will study that reaction to develop better jamming techniques for future encounters. This is the shadow war in the skies, a silent struggle for control, fought not with missiles, but with technology, intelligence, and strategic positioning. The reconnaissance plane's mission isn't over yet, but it's clear that today's encounter is part of a much bigger conflict, one that doesn't rely on gunfire, but on information supremacy. The real question is, how much longer can these confrontations continue before one of them crosses the line? The tension in the cockpit is suffocating. For the past several minutes, the American pilots have maintained absolute focus, their hands steady on the controls, their eyes locked on the aggressive Chinese J-16s. These fighter jets are not just here to observe, they are pushing, provoking, testing the limits of what the U.S. crew will tolerate. The two Chinese jets continue their calculated harassment, flying dangerously close, forcing the U.S. reconnaissance aircraft into a narrower and narrower flight path. Every movement is deliberate, The Chinese pilots know exactly what they're doing. This isn't random, it's a tactic. They are trying to force the American plane into making a mistake. Then in an instant, the situation escalates to a point of no return. The lead J-16 suddenly cuts its engines and drops directly in front of the U.S. aircraft. For a split second, the massive reconnaissance plane is on a collision course. The American pilot has barely a second to react. At this speed, at this altitude, there is no room for error. If the crew panics and swerves too hard, they could stall, spiral out of control, or even crash into the ocean below. If they don't react fast enough, they will slam into the back of the J-16, causing a catastrophic mid-air collision. This is the most dangerous moment of the encounter. The pilot doesn't think, he acts. With absolute precision, he pushes forward on the throttle and makes a micro adjustment to altitude, just enough to barely avoid clipping the J-16's tail. The Chinese jet's afterburners flare as it suddenly accelerates again, narrowly escaping impact. But the turbulence left in its wake is devastating. The U.S. aircraft shudders violently as it plows through the disturbed air left behind. The cockpit rattles like an earthquake, warning lights flash, and loose equipment inside the cabin goes flying. The intelligence officers in the back, strapped into their seats, brace as the aircraft shakes aggressively. One of them mutters under his breath, "That was too close." This wasn't just reckless flying. This was a calculated intimidation tactic. The Chinese pilot knew exactly what he was doing, forcing the U.S. aircraft into a dangerous position, testing their response, pushing them to the very edge of their discipline. If the American pilot had panicked, if he had reacted a fraction of a second too late, both planes could have been destroyed. And if that had happened, the world could have woken up to breaking news. U.S. and Chinese fighter jets collide over the Pacific. Global crisis unfolds. Would Washington have seen it as an accident or an act of war? Would Beijing have claimed the U.S. provoked the incident or used it as an excuse for military escalation? The American pilot remains calm. This isn't his first intercept. He's seen aggressive moves before. But this was something different. The Chinese jet doesn't leave. It loops back around, reforming alongside its wingman, as if to say, "We're not finished yet." The radio remains silent. The tension is suffocating. For a moment, it feels like the situation could spiral completely out of control. If the Chinese jet tries another reckless maneuver, the American pilot will have no choice but to take evasive action. If that action is misinterpreted, if either side sees it as an offensive move, this could escalate into an actual engagement. But something happens that neither side expects. A message comes through the secure communications channel inside the U.S. aircraft. Disengage, maintain course, do not provoke. It's an order from higher command. Somewhere miles away, top-level strategists are watching this situation unfold in real time. They know how close this is to disaster. The mission isn't worth the risk of war. The American pilot exhales slowly and keeps his hands steady. He doesn't engage. He doesn't retaliate. He holds the course. The Chinese jets are waiting for a reaction, but they don't get one. And just like that, the J-16s begin to pull away. The game is over for today. As the American reconnaissance aircraft steadies itself, the crew knows that this was more than just another intercept. It was a message, a warning, a test. This was one of the closest calls yet, and next time, they might not be so lucky. The skies have always been a battlefield, but in today's world, fighter jets, reconnaissance aircraft, and surveillance drones are not just tools of war. They are instruments of power. Every aerial encounter, every close intercept, every near collision isn't just about the pilots in the cockpit. It's a chess game between nations, a battle for dominance in the sky, and a test of who holds the real power in global military strategy. For decades, the ability to control the skies has defined who leads and who follows in world affairs. Nations with air superiority don't just protect their borders. They shape global conflicts, dictate economic routes, and decide the fate of regions. This is why the United States and China are constantly testing each other. The confrontation over the Pacific wasn't just about one mission, one reconnaissance aircraft, or two fighter jets playing a dangerous game of chicken. It was about who owns the skies above the South China Sea and the Indo-Pacific. The South China Sea is one of the most strategically important waterways in the world. A third of global trade passes through these waters. The U.S. Navy Air Force and its allies conduct frequent missions in the region to uphold freedom of navigation and monitor Chinese military activity. But China sees things differently. Beijing has long claimed nearly the entire South China Sea as its own, despite international courts rejecting these claims. To enforce its dominance, China has militarized artificial islands, built airstrips, deployed anti-ship missiles, and significantly increased aerial patrols. Intercepts like the one today aren't random. They are planned, strategic moves in a much bigger power struggle. China's goal is clear: assert dominance over the region and make it clear that U.S. military presence is unwelcome. But for the U.S., these missions are just as critical. If China controls the airspace over the South China Sea, it effectively controls the trade routes below. If Beijing succeeds in pushing the U.S. out, it sets a precedent for expanding military influence even further. This is why every reconnaissance flight matters. Every time a U.S. aircraft enters the region, it sends a clear message: we are here, we are watching, and we are not going anywhere. But China's response is just as firm. The close encounters, the aggressive maneuvers, the electronic jamming, they are all warnings. China is testing the limits of what the U.S. will tolerate, seeing how far they can push without triggering a military response. It's a dangerous balancing act. How long can these confrontations continue before one side makes a critical mistake? The arms race for aerial supremacy. This battle isn't just fought in the air, it's also a technological race. Both nations are investing billions of dollars into hypersonic missiles, stealth aircraft, electronic warfare systems, and AI-driven combat technology. The U.S. is developing the next-generation air dominance NGAD fighter jet, a sixth-generation aircraft designed to outmaneuver anything in the sky today. China, on the other hand, has rapidly advanced its own air force with the J-20 stealth fighter, electronic warfare aircraft, and advanced drone swarms. The competition doesn't stop there. Both countries are pouring resources into unmanned aerial combat vehicles, UCAVs, artificial intelligence-assisted dogfighting, and electronic attack aircraft. The question isn't who has the most firepower, it's who will dominate the battlefield of the future. Will it be the U.S. with its decades of experience in global air superiority? Or will China's rapid military expansion push it into the dominant position? The Allies factor, a regional power struggle. The Indo-Pacific isn't just a U.S.-China rivalry. Other nations are watching closely. Japan, South Korea, Australia, India, and the Philippines all have a stake in this conflict. For decades, U.S. military presence has been a shield for smaller nations in the region, protecting them from Chinese expansion. But if China succeeds in pushing the U.S. out, regional powers will be forced to make difficult choices. Will they align with China's growing sphere of influence? Or will they strengthen military ties with the U.S. and its allies to push back against Beijing's territorial ambitions? This is why every aerial encounter between U.S. and Chinese jets is bigger than just two pilots in the sky. It's a signal to the world, a warning to allies, a test of global power, the risk of escalation. But there's an even bigger question looming over this struggle. What happens when one of these confrontations goes too far? A near miss is one thing, but what if the next encounter ends in a mid-air collision? What if a pilot miscalculates? What if an aggressive maneuver results in a crash? Would it be seen as an accident, or would it trigger a chain reaction of military escalation, diplomatic conflict, and global instability? The world has already witnessed small incidents turning into major conflicts. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea after military confrontations in Ukraine escalated. In 2018, a Chinese naval vessel came within 45 yards of a U.S. destroyer, nearly triggering a maritime collision. In 2023, rising tensions in the Taiwan Strait led to near engagements between U.S. and Chinese warships. Would a fighter jet crash spark a military standoff between the world's two largest superpowers? Would Washington be forced to retaliate? Would China use it as an excuse to escalate military operations in the South China Sea or Taiwan? These are the questions being asked in military strategy rooms right now. What comes next? The bigger picture is clear. The battle for aerial dominance is about more than just the skies. It's about global influence, military strategy, and the balance of power in the 21st century. And as US and Chinese fighter jets continue their dangerous encounters in the Pacific, the world watches closely, because the next move could change everything. How long can this game of high-speed brinkmanship continue before it turns into something far more dangerous? Will diplomacy prevent a full-scale military conflict, or are we inching closer to an unavoidable showdown? This is not just about fighter jets. This is about the future of global power. The encounter over the Pacific may have ended, but the battle for air superiority is far from over. The U.S. reconnaissance aircraft has completed its mission, collecting valuable intelligence on China's military operations. But at what cost? The near collision, the electronic warfare, the aggressive maneuvering, all of it signals that tensions are only escalating. The question now isn't whether these confrontations will continue. The real question is how much longer they can remain controlled before one spirals into disaster. The inevitable escalation. The next time a U.S. reconnaissance aircraft flies a mission over the South China Sea, it's almost guaranteed that Chinese fighter jets will be waiting. Each time the encounters get closer, more aggressive, more dangerous. In recent years, China has significantly increased its aerial operations, intercepting U.S. and allied aircraft with greater frequency. In May 2023, a Chinese J-16 flew dangerously close to a U.S. RC-135, creating extreme turbulence and shaking the massive reconnaissance aircraft. In October 2023, a J-11 approached a U.S. B-52 bomber at just 10 feet, nearly causing a mid-air catastrophe. Australian and Canadian military aircraft have also faced dangerous interceptions by Chinese warplanes. Each of these incidents is one miscalculation away from disaster. What if, next time, the turbulence from an aggressive maneuver sends a jet into an unrecoverable spin? What if a pilot overreacts and fires a warning shot? What if two aircraft collide, sending wreckage into the ocean below? Would the world call it an accident, or would it be seen as an act of war? This is the fragile balance that exists in the skies today. An unspoken agreement that these encounters should never cross the line into outright combat. But what happens when one side decides to push that line just a little further? What would war in the skies look like? If a military conflict were to erupt in the Indo-Pacific, air superiority would be the deciding factor. The U.S. would likely deploy its most advanced fighter jets, F-22 Raptors, F-35 Lightning IIs, and its next-generation air dominance systems. The goal? Cripple China's ability to control the skies before a full-scale war even begins. But China is no longer the underdog. Its J-20 stealth fighter, advanced air defense systems, and hypersonic missiles could challenge even the U.S. Air Force's dominance. A war in the skies wouldn't just be fought with bullets and missiles. It would be a battle of electronic warfare, AI-driven combat, and high-speed decision-making where the winner could be decided in milliseconds. And unlike past conflicts, this wouldn't just involve two nations. Japan, South Korea, Australia, and NATO allies would be forced to take a side. The entire Indo-Pacific region would become a war zone. A single miscalculation could set off a global crisis. The race for air supremacy. To prevent this, both sides are now engaged in an unprecedented arms race. The U.S. is fast-tracking development of its next-generation air dominance NGAD fighter, an aircraft that will outperform anything in the sky today. China is expanding its stealth fighter program, increasing production of the J-20, and testing AI-powered drone swarms designed to overwhelm enemy forces. Both nations are investing billions into electronic warfare systems, hypersonic weapons, and AI-assisted combat. The goal? Win the skies before war even begins. In the coming years, the world will see more intercepts, more close encounters, and more high-risk aerial confrontations. The only question is, how much longer can both sides avoid the tipping point? Can diplomacy prevent disaster? The U.S. and China both recognize the risk. Military leaders on both sides have called for better communication to prevent mid-air collisions and accidental conflicts. In November 2022, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin met with his Chinese counterpart, emphasizing the need for crisis communication. In early 2024, military analysts pushed for a direct hotline between U.S. and Chinese air forces to prevent accidental escalation. But will talks be enough to stop the growing tensions? China sees U.S. surveillance flights as provocations and violations of its airspace. The U.S. sees China's intercepts as reckless, dangerous, and a threat to international law. Neither side wants war, but neither side is willing to back down. And in the skies, where pilots make split-second decisions at Mach speeds, diplomacy is only as strong as the discipline of those in the cockpit. What's next for the Indo-Pacific? The South China Sea remains a flashpoint, but it's not the only region at risk. Taiwan. China has repeatedly vowed to reunify Taiwan with the mainland, by force if necessary. Any military action there would immediately draw in the U.S. and its allies. The East China Sea. Chinese fighter jets have frequently entered Japan's air defense zone, prompting near-daily responses from Japan's F-15s. The Arctic. As ice caps melt, China is expanding its presence in the Arctic, setting up a new zone for potential aerial confrontations. The next major aerial showdown might not happen over the South China Sea. It could happen anywhere China is expanding its military influence. How will it end? Some experts believe this is a new Cold War, one fought not with nuclear weapons, but with military encounters in the sky. Others believe it's only a matter of time before one incident escalates beyond control. History has shown that prolonged military tensions often lead to conflict. The question is, will the world's two largest military powers find a way to de-escalate, or are we on a path that inevitably leads to war? One thing is certain, the skies will remain a battleground. And as the next U.S. reconnaissance aircraft takes off, somewhere over the Pacific, Chinese fighter jets are already waiting. Your turn to weigh in. What do you think? Should the U.S. military take a tougher stance and challenge these intercepts more aggressively? Or is diplomacy and restraint the only way to avoid a catastrophic miscalculation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to stay informed on military confrontations, air superiority battles, and the future of aerial warfare, make sure to subscribe to our channel, because in the battle for the skies, information is the most powerful weapon. Subscribe now and never miss a mission.